Today our webcast will be on supply chain inventory.
Hi there, my name is Dominic, and yes, I'm Director of Industry Solutions for IBIS. And a lot of questions over the past few years have popped up around inventory in general, and how does it work with supply chain, and why is it so important? We're going to go through a list of various reasons why inventory is so important, why you need to manage it so closely, what some of the issues are that affect it, and hopefully at the end, we'll be able to show you some of the solutions that you should be considering as far as what is required and what you should be looking at. Our next slide really, talks about a little bit about us. We've been around for 25 years. We've got a lot of expertise in the area, both in AX, but especially in the advanced supply chain software area for distribution. That's what our background is. That's where our expertise comes from, especially in the industrial distribution and industrial equipment manufacturing. On our next slide, you'll see that we've got our certifications from Microsoft, from CFMD, which is certified for Microsoft Dynamics, as well as being one of 17 Microsoft Global ISVs for our software. So we've been around for some time. We have a lot of expertise in the area, and we'd like to talk to you about that expertise. On the next slide, what we did is there's been a lot of discussions around what is going on in the market, and there's been studies done. And what I've done is I've actually pulled the studies out, and I've highlighted in red the areas in those concerns that will tie to inventory. For instance, brick and mortar closures. How does that affect inventory? How does that affect the supply chain around inventory? Price competition definitely will affect your inventory and how you manage that supply chain. In other words, you increase it, you decrease it, you direct ship. There's so many opportunities in how you're going to meet and adjust your pricing to be competitive. Cash flow to support acquisition growth. Well, if you're not managing your inventory well, you're going to have a problem in a lot of areas, which will affect your cash flow. And we'll see some of the areas, such as customer service and so forth. Sales execution. Having the right inventory at the right time will definitely affect how well your sales are executed upon, and that will affect even the price of the inventory, what you can sell it for. Rapidly changing distribution models. Your distribution supply chain changes. How do you react to that? How will the inventory be able to help you override any of the issues that are being caused by it? Changing dynamics on how individuals and corporations purchase products. Collaboration is very big. If you're not set up for collaboration, your supply chain is going to be affected, and it's going to be affected negatively. Therefore, how do you deal with it? The lead time, if you're not collaborating properly, will be longer. Longer lead times means higher safety stocks. Higher safety stocks mean higher inventory costs, and so forth. Competitive pricing, margins. That ties into the price competition, but it becomes even more specific as you look at how it affects your margins now. Higher inventories, lower prices, lower margins. So that's one of the areas you have to look at. Demand creation for products. If you don't manage your demand properly, that's going to affect how you inventory your items. That's also going to affect the amount of back orders and potential lost orders that you're going to have. Developing meaningful strategies for the internet. If you're going to go into e-commerce, customers are going to expect that you have information at the fingertip in order to let them know as they enter the order what you have, when you're going to have it available, and how you're going to ship it and when you're going to ship it. So that's extremely important. How to grow in a shrinking marketplace. As the marketplace gets smaller into some areas, how are you going to stimulate growth? What are you going to do about it? Inventory is going to be a major player in that area, and in how you're going to achieve that goal, and how to compete with the nationals. Of course, as more and more nationals get involved, they're not going to come in there and be more expensive than you. Chances are they're going to be less expensive. They're going to also invest a lot of money in having the inventory available, to be able to supply the customers faster. How will you deal with that? What is the inventory plan you've got in there? If you go to the next slide, which is the industry-wide concerns, well, you look at the impact of the rise of vending machines. How is that going to affect your inventory? How are you going to deal with it? Well, guess what? If it's in a vending machine, the customer hasn't paid for it yet. So how's that going to reflect in both the inventory valuation as well as the inventory you're going to keep? Amazon, major player out there. They usually have quick turnaround times. They have good prices. How do they play in your sandbox, and how are you going to handle that? Material inflation, we all know that issue. You get hit with higher prices. Your customers don't want to pay for it. So you have methods in the inventory side that you can play around with, from drop ship, direct shipment capabilities, to potentially consignment inventory, to so many different ways that you can get around in order to not get overwhelmed with the material inflation, the increase in prices. Encroachment by big box retailers. Well, they're all over the place, and they've got inventory right there on the spot. A lot of them have all kinds of discounts and trade agreements that they've put into place with their customers, which could also be your customers. And in some areas, there's going to be a lot of encroachment, so you've got to figure out a way to get around that. Commoditization of products. If you're not adding value to a product, then you're selling it strictly on price and availability. What is the plan? How are you going to manage your supply chain around that? Growth of generalists versus specialist distributors. So, a lot of companies out there are now looking at how they're going to source items that they usually wouldn't stock for their customers, so that the customers buy everything from them. So you've got to be very careful in that area and come up with plans. And, not the last or the least, but manufacturer-distributor communication. How do you collaborate? How can improving that collaboration, but to actually become more efficient, minimize your inventory, and maximize your customer satisfaction and delivery? If you look at the next slide, you'll see that there's two main reasons. Now, I've got more reasons under that, but two main reasons to have inventory. Well, accommodate the different cycles of supply chain and demand, obviously extremely important, and as an edge against variability, which is your safety stock. Those are the two main reasons for inventory. And if you remember the old Apex slides, which was the lake with the rocks under it, and as you reduce your inventory, the rocks pop up, so you need to deal with those issues, because the rocks are really issues, and you need to manage that, and you need to be able to navigate around it in some areas. Those are the two main reasons. However, there's a bunch of sub-reasons, and on the next slide what you'll see is, the secondary reasons. You're looking at competitive advantage. You want to go out there and you want to be the company that everybody wants to order from because of so many different reasons, all of which are competitive and put you in a better situation. Customer sourcing footprint. You want to be the go-to company. You want to increase your footprint with your customers. You want to sell them more product. You want to be able to go out there and source whatever they need, whether it's an item that you stock or an item you don't stock. It doesn't matter. If you can capture the whole order, then your margins and your footprint are going to increase. You might want to keep some inventory as a loss leader. Bring somebody in so that they buy more expensive items from you, and therefore offset the loss of margins on one item because of the increased margins that you're going to have on the other item. If you just analyze that single item itself, you're going to say, why am I stocking this? But if you look at the bigger picture, which is what you have to look at as far as your supply chain is concerned, then you realize that you need that item in order to drive the higher margin items. Market introductions. You want to go into certain markets. You've got new products. You're going to have to store them. You're going to have to keep them in inventory. How can you best manage that, minimize the costs of a new market introduction? Well, supply chain management will help you in that area. Relationships. You want to build relationships with certain vendors and certain customers. It may require that you keep certain items in inventory, therefore affecting your margins. Again, how can you take advantage of proper tools and approaches in order to be able to manage that? So it's extremely important that all of these items come into play, regardless of the fact that there's really two reasons. There's a lot more reasons. Once you start getting down into it, you start analyzing it, and there's a lot more than the ones I just popped up over. If we go to the next slide, you're going to see that I have a slide that basically says how complicated and how many challenges you may have to your supply chain, which means, how do I get that inventory? Where do I get it from? There's so many different ways of dealing with inventory. And we're going to talk about a couple of different possibilities as you make a decision as to where you're going to source your inventory from. So what you're looking at is a very complex, at a high level, supply chain. Then when you get into the details of your supply chain, you might find it's even more complex, and you have to look at it in so many different ways instead of just, the usual way that you've approached it. We always did it this way. The we always did it this way approach is no longer an approach you can live with, not when you're looking at these type of supply chains. There's been a study that was done by Jonathan Barnes from MIT that basically says that 40% of your average company is unprofitable, and only 20 to 30% is really driving the profits and subsidizing the rest. But why is the 40% not profitable? Is it because you have the wrong prices? Now, this study really pushes towards the pricing side of things, saying that you don't have the right prices for those products. But if you go into the study further, you'll see that as you analyze it, it starts off with the prices, but then it starts questioning your inventory methodology. What is it that you use to manage? How do you manage your inventory? What is it that you use to manage your inventory? Are you keeping too much inventory of the wrong parts? In other words, all of it then starts going right back to pricing, which then in turn drives margin. So that 40%, the price could be adjusted, absolutely. But when you start sitting down and looking at it, you're going to start looking at the fact that maybe you're stocking the wrong items there and you don't need to stock them anymore. Maybe a percentage of those are loss leaders, like I said, so therefore you have a need to stock it. Maybe the rest, you're just not using the proper inventory tools in order to maximize that and make it profitable. Too much inventory, not enough direct shipping, no vendor managed inventory. There's so many different ways you can approach that, still keep that inventory, but remove it from the 40% that's unprofitable and add and make the 20 to 30% much bigger. So there's a lot of different ways that we can approach this, and these are just some of the tools that you have to start looking at. If we look at the next slide, we're talking about why do you keep inventory? Well, again, we're going to get into even more details now, because now you're looking at, out on the marketplace, customers have expectations of my company and what I bring to the market. Vendor expectations. Well, I want to have exclusivity in certain products. Well, I can only have exclusivity if I sell a certain amount. I need to commit to a certain amount. Does that mean that I'm going to be carrying extra inventory the first 6 months and then finally burning through it? That's a decision that comes into play as you're looking at why you've got inventory. Internal expectations. You've got upstream, downstream centers that you're working with, and you may have to keep a certain amount of inventories in those areas to make sure that these centers don't go down, because the cost of a machine going down is way too expensive if it's your own equipment that you're looking at, but the same applies to your customers. You are feeding them inventory, and if their machines go down, well, guess what? You're not necessarily going to meet customer expectations. You've got competitive pressures. We talked about overseas coming in. We talked about brick and mortar stores. We talked about the major retailers that are out there right now that are selling the same products you're carrying. You're talking about pricing competition. There's so many different pressures that come into play on the competitive side that will affect your supply chain and how or the type of inventories that you're going to carry. Value add pressure. Competitors, again, as part of the competitive pressure side, it's not necessarily only on the pricing, it's also on the value add. You're going to start having competitors that are going to come in and they're going to add value to it. Maybe free freight, maybe training, maybe assistance on the product. If it's a complex product that you're selling that goes into a complex assembly later on site somewhere. So there's all kinds of value that they can bring there. Change management. Well, you have to deal with change every day. Change affects inventory. Affecting your inventory, if you're not managing it properly, will affect your margins, both positive and negative. So you got to start looking at that. Collaboration. How do you talk to your vendors? How do you talk to your customers? What type of information do you send them? Do you manage their demand and in turn, manage your demand with your vendor in order to make it a flow so you're not sitting on inventory for a long time? How does that information go back and forth? How quickly does that information get updated? What is the latest that's being put into place? And of course, how is it going to drive sales and margin, because in the end, that is really what you want to get out of this. Is you want to drive sales, be able to increase your sales, and respond to your sales requirements, as well as affecting margins positively. In other words, increasing them, not decreasing them, by going out and getting potential opportunities in sales that are going to affect your margins negatively instead of positively. So these are all points that we're looking at. Now, there are smart inventory approaches. Smart inventory management will increase your margins. That's what we've been talking about. Think about it. If you've got more direct shifts, it's not sitting in your location. You're not handling the material. You don't have carrying costs, and you're not paying for it till it's shipped, because the drop ship goes out. You get invoiced as the drop ship goes out. So that's fantastic. Your smart inventory management allows you to increase customer satisfaction. They're getting orders in as expected, at the right price, at the right time, at the right quality level. That allows you to satisfy your customers and build excitement around your business. Reduction in handling costs, VMI, vendor managed inventory. Like I said, direct ship and drop ships. All of these are various approaches that you can use in order to reduce handling costs, or having the type of inventory demand planning capabilities that allow you to reduce your safety stock. Again, you're minimizing the amount of handling costs. Smart inventory management allows you to capture more market share. If you're managing your inventory properly, if your inventory is getting where it's supposed to, if the management of your inventory is reducing your price, then there's two possibilities here. You can maintain your margin, but increase your profits by, increasing the market share you have, or you could just increase your profits by increasing the margin, because people would be willing to pay more because of the efficiencies that you bring into their environment. Market stature, people tend to forget that, but you could go from being somebody that's viewed as a discounter. You can call them when you run out of inventory, and they'll be the guys that'll get it out to you, but the rest of the time you order from somebody else because you trust them more. Well, you can change that, and you can become the trusted partner. You can become the go-to. You can become the guy that actually delivers, the company that actually delivers and sells based on capabilities that you've increased because of your supply chain. And that will obviously change the vision and the view and the stature that your customers, that the market has of your company, and will allow you to do certain things that you couldn't do before, and increased margins could definitely be one of them. Smart inventory management allows you to increase your inventory turns. You increase your inventory turns, again, you're making more money because you've got less money tied up in inventory that you can use for so many other things. And of course, there's much more that we can add there. This list is a much longer list than just a few items that I've got listed on it. Supply chain inventory, sustainability. We talked about all these great things, how great everything can be for you, but have you looked at how sustainable, how strong, how good your supply chain is? How do I ensure reliability in my supply chain? Well, partner relationships. I build strong relationships, collaboration. We talk about forecasts, and that partner relationship is extremely important as you build your relationships with your vendors, so that you change something from being a vendor and customer relationship to becoming a partner relationship with both your vendors and your customers. In other words, you talk to each other, you understand each other's needs, you know how to fulfill each other's requirements, and now all of a sudden there's partners talking at the table and willing to help each other, rather than just a vendor and a customer and somebody in the middle, and they're trying, I'm screaming for something, but I didn't tell them that this order might be coming in, and therefore my vendor can't help me, and the customer is upset because they expect me to have it, but I didn't know the order was coming in, so I wasn't ready for it. You've got to build relationships, and they've got to be the partner type of relationships. How do I avoid disruptions? If you don't have strong partner relationships, it's going to be pretty hard to avoid disruptions, and it's going to be pretty hard to have any kind of backup plans in the case of acts of God. I mean, if you remember a few years ago, the tsunami in Japan, and all of a sudden Toyota, Honda, Nissan, they had to shut down their manufacturing in the U.S. their assembly because they couldn't get the manufactured parts across because everything had shut down. Local wars. There's certain raw materials that come out of certain areas. If you happen to be getting those raw materials or those specific items for your distribution, and the country you're getting it from or the area you're getting it from is disrupted by a war, not having the right relationships or a good backup plan may mean that you're going to be out of those materials because the other areas are now going to be supplying. They got to pick up now and be able to supply more than they were, and that's not necessarily doable. And guess who they're going to supply? They're going to supply the companies they have a partnering relationship with, not just the company they sell to. There's a big difference between the two. Shortages, that's something that could just happen because of machine breakdowns at the manufacturing level, who happens to be your supplier, and now you have to turn around and you have to get it. You've got items that are coming in from overseas. There's storms at sea, the Atlantic, the Pacific, you never know. It's delayed, it's sunk, it could be so many things that could happen there. Or the items you receive don't pass quality control. Those are all shortages that are going to cause issues for you. What are your backup plans? What have you got set up? How reliable and sustainable are your capabilities? And of course, financial disruptions. Companies are going to run into issues, financial issues that can pop up, and that will definitely affect their supplying, their capabilities in getting you the inventory that you need in order to sustain your supply chain. So what are the backup plans that you've gotten here? There's a lot of discussions that are taking place right now, especially at the sales and operations level, where the executives are sitting down and they're trying to figure out exactly that. What do we have as a backup? How can we avoid, loss of revenue because we don't have a plan if something happens to our supply chain? You've got to be able to build that supply chain. You've got to be able to support that supply chain. You've got to be able to have a backup plan in place in case something disrupts that supply chain. Reliability for supply chain capabilities are extremely important because when you're looking at reliability, you're looking at your vendors. And that goes back to whether it's a trusted partnership you have in place or whether it's just a sales, you place orders with them, with your vendors. The reliability of the material they're sending you. You may have very specific quality requirements that are in place there. Do they meet those requirements every time, or are there costs that you're incurring when you receive it in order to perform quality assurance processes to make sure that this product is now something that you can bring to market? Transportation. How reliable is your transportation? How do you get your stock in there? If you always get it by truck and there's a strike, now you got to get it in by air. Isn't the kind of product that can even come in by air, because some products are just going to be way too expensive and you can't put enough on an airplane to get it there. And if you got to get it by train or by ship, that may, by vessel, that's going to delay the shipment. Outsourcing. How reliable are your subcontractors? Because you may have outsourcing operations that have to take place. Location. Where is it coming from? Is it a hot spot or is it a reliable spot that it's coming in from? And then special requirements. How good are your vendors at making sure that you can deliver to your customers any kind of special requirements they may come up with? You need to make sure that your supply chain, as they're delivering their inventory, the inventory that you're ordering, the items that you're ordering, can meet these requirements. Otherwise, you're going to have a major problem in being able to deliver and manage to the expected level that your customers are looking for. And of course, the vendors would like to know what it is that, how you want them to meet these areas, because it's very rare that a vendor would want to send you something that you're going to return anyways, because there's costs that are incurred by them as well when that happens, and they lose their margins. But you are responsible to make sure that that happens. You cannot pass that responsibility on to somebody else. On the next slide here, you're going to be looking at managing your supply chain. How can you manage your supply chain? Well, first and foremost, hopefully you have the right software that will allow you to manage your supply chain. There's too many demands, there's too many parts to this puzzle not to have a good, strong software package that's going to help you manage this. doing it manually is next to impossible. On one of the previous slides, we saw the global aspect of supply chains. Well, everybody has a global aspect of their supply chain. There's no two ways about it. You're going to get something that's coming from outside the country that's an item that you have to manage. So what you sell globally does not dictate what you're going to purchase globally. So you're going to be forced into that. So not having the right software to manage that, the right software to manage the lead times, the right software to manage the monetary aspects of it, the right software to manage the information that has to go back and forth, you're going to have, you're setting yourself up for problems. The next one is hardware. And I'm just not talking about, having the right hardware for the software. I'm talking about handhelds, automating a lot of the processes that take place on the shop floor. I'm talking about mobility, whether it be a handheld that's, on the shop floor, or whether it be your sales force that's out there using, Surfaces and iPads and their iPhones and, Microsoft phones and so forth, in order to be able to take orders, look at inventory, make promises, give delivery dates to customers and prospects. That's all extremely important as you look at managing your supply chain. Training. Are your people trained? Are your customers trained? Let's not forget, there's an upstream and a downstream, and your customers need to be trained on your capabilities and what you can or cannot do. Are your vendors trained? Same thing. They've got to be trained. They've got to understand what you can or cannot do so that the process, which is the next item, is in place and it's a strong process. Now, I say process redefinition rather than re-engineering because in a lot of cases, there's only so, you can't re-engineer your vendor and you can't re-engineer your customer. But you can redefine and make it a much smoother process, a process that will allow for higher margins. Do you have the right tools for business intelligence and analytics? Can you actually look at what you've done? Is it online real-time information that's coming to you, or is it something that you're running at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, and then you're analyzing it, which by then, by the way, is going to be way too late in order to react and avoid any kind of issues. Managing change. Your market is changing, as I said. Are you set up? Do you have the software, hardware, training, and processes in place that are being redefined, looked at, analyzed, and then you can manage that ahead of time and not just react to it, but actually plan for it, which is extremely important. And then, of course, like I said, partnerships. You've got to build partnerships with your customers and your vendors. You're not going to be able to build partnerships with your customers and vendors if the previous points we just discussed in the slide are not in place to allow you to do that, to allow you to manage it, to allow you to be ahead of any issues and avoid you actually reacting to it, but actually planning for it. Big differences there. Sourcing decisions you have to make. Again, I go back to that picture I had there with the global view. Well, you got to do sourcing decisions. Is it something you're going to store in house? Is it something you're going to have a 3PL store? Landed costs. You got to know what your true landed costs are as you make an onshore decision, a nearshore decision, an offshore decision. Landed costs is extremely important because a lot of decisions are sometimes made without all the information being in there, and therefore it makes something look more positive than it really should be. And when the decision is made, you only find out later on that your margins are lower, and then you're scrambling to try and figure out how to fix it. Plus your landed cost, I say true landed cost because it can't be estimates. Your landed costs have to be based on the real costs. So you have to be able to pick up all the costs from the tariffs, from the brokers, from the real cost of transportation, not the estimated cost, and so forth and so on, so you can figure that out. Consignment inventory. Does it make sense for me to actually have my inventory sit at my customers at my cost? Well, believe it or not, that can make a lot of sense because if you've got it sitting there, you're not handling it. you're also not taking up room in your warehouse. Well, those are dollars that actually get to stay in your pocket. So being able to have consignment inventory makes a lot of sense. On the other side, well, maybe you can work out a deal with your vendor and have him manage the inventory. It's not in your books, it's not on your site, and the vendor is managing it. So there's a lot of dollars that are being percentage points that are being added to your margins at that point. And then there's, of course, the value add side of things. What are you going to do to add value? That's going to be based on your vendor expectations, because you got to make sure they understand what value you're going to bring to your customers and how they can help you with that as you build that partnering relationship. And then there's the customer's expectations as to what you're adding, what you're bringing to value to them. Why is it that they're willing to pay half a percentage point more to you than somebody else? And again, that's got to be part of the process, both upstream and downstream. You can't just add value that's worth anything without making sure that you've got your partner on the vendor side being able to support you that makes sense to your customer side at the other end. So those are a lot of decisions that come into play in the inventory side and your supply chain and inventory. A lot of those points have been brought up, and the reason I'm showing these two slides is that you can't just manage your inventory only with an advanced inventory management solution, because you got to look at how you're going to manage your orders, how the orders are going to come in, and how you're going to be dealing with those orders, and what's the value that you bring in at that point. But you also got to know what kind of agreements you set up between your customers, between your vendors, what kind of spas you have in place, how you're going to manage the chargebacks and so forth. So the inventory we've been talking about is a process that you need to manage, but a process that ties into the rest of the business. So it's important that you be able to view all that, and a lot of that will be done specifically, once you analyze it. So you've got to have ways of analyzing what you've put into place. Planning and expecting something are different in a lot of cases than the results, the actuals. So it's extremely important that you be able to compare. And in a process where you're trying to manage that inventory to the best of your capabilities and increase the margins as much as possible and build those partnerships, you have to have a way to go back real time, online, and be able to analyze everything that you've done and how you've done it. So that's why I talk about the process. We're talking about inventory, but inventory ties into so many other areas of the business. In summary, you've got to look at smart inventory management for your supply chain inventory. You've got to look at smart inventory management to increase your margins. If you do it right, it's going to be a result. You may not even change your prices, but because of the efficiencies that you're creating and developing, your margins are just naturally going to start going up. You're going to increase your customer satisfaction. If you're working with them as a partner, if you're giving them, various tools and approaches to guarantee that they have their inventory quicker, that your prices are in line with the value that you're bringing, it's obviously going to increase the customer satisfaction, which in turn also increases your margins. Reduction in handling costs, again, the other outcome of that is increased margins. Being able to capture more market share, because you can go out there a lot more confident in what it is that you're bringing to the market, how you're bringing it to the market, at the price point that you're bringing it to the market, and feel comfortable about the margins that you're going to be resulting in your business. Gain the industry stature that we were talking about. People are going to look at you and go, if I do business with this company, because they will do what they have promised they would do. And that promise is basically accepting a sales order with all the commitments that you've got on it, from pricing to quantity to quality to delivery date. They will look at that in a positive way, and given a choice, they're also going to be looking at smart inventory management processes inside their business and building that partnering relationship with you will be worth the price. Because the commodities guys, he's just selling on price, and he's not promising anything other than a lower price. If you catch him on the right date, he's got the inventory. If you don't, tough luck. And the worst case scenario is he may actually commit to it and then not deliver. So that's not a good situation. Greater inventory turns. You're going to be managing your inventory better. Your turns are going to be better. As your turns are better, well, obviously your material handling goes down, your carrying costs go down, your space requirement goes down. So all of that translates automatically into less costs, higher margins. And there's a lot more that can be added to that as you start getting into the details, especially as you start analyzing it through analytics and business intelligence as to how many other ways you can find to meet the requirements in the market and to meet and satisfy your supply chain inventory requirements.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you for joining us today.